Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with mental health coach Megan Pasierbek. Megan has a background in psychology studies, internal family systems, wellness coaching, and psychedelic-assisted therapy, and is passionate about guiding others on their healing journeys. In this week's episode, expect to learn the downside of Big Pharma, what internal family systems is, how to take your power back, finding your true, authentic life, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Megan Pasierbek, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Long time no speak, my friend. How have you been?
I know, just a few hours. Very well.
A few hours. Guys, you're in for a treat. I've also been in for a treat because I've been working with Megs for about 11, 12 weeks now. Yeah. Well, probably 14 or 15 because we had a couple of little breaks in there. And we are talking all things IFS. For those that aren't up to date with the lingo, I understand. It's called internal family systems or parts work, depending who you talk to and what you know about it. So we're going to tap into a lot today. Megs, can you give the guys a little 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Sure. So my name is Megan Pasierbek. I am an internal family systems therapy practitioner, which we can get into, a wellness coach and a psychedelic-assisted therapy facilitator. What got me to here today is a lifelong journey with my own mental health, which led me to going to therapy in my early 20s. I then went and started a psychology degree in about 2007. I dropped out after my second year, then went and pursued a banking career and then an interior design career. But through my own, personal development and healing, I discovered IFS and it changed my life. It was just quite phenomenal. And through that, plus plant medicine and breath work and finding my community have been the most healing things of my life. And in all of that time, in 2019, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2 and spent a bit of time on medication. And I'm very proud to say that since then, I went on this journey, came off medication, discovered that I could manage this condition with supplementation and lifestyle choices, as well as healing a lot of trauma from my childhood and my past. And I'm proud to say that I haven't had a single episode since 2020, and I'm not on any medication, any pharmaceutical medication of any kind. And through my journey, realized that when I would tell people my story, particularly in our coaching group, Blake, that was kind of where I first kind of shared it, the reactions of people in hearing it, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually really powerful. And I think I need to share this so people know that you don't necessarily have to go down the traditional path of pharmaceuticals and all the host of horrible side effects and things that brings. But if you actually just heal and do these things, then you can find a better way. And then studied IFS 3 years ago. I've since then received my wellness coaching certification and then did study last year with you to become a psychedelic-assisted therapy practitioner. And now I've got my coaching business and I mostly work with IFS, but I do a little bit of coaching in conjunction with that and then also do run journeys from time to time as well. And I find IFS and the psychedelics work really well together.
How fucking good that you're not on medicines from Big Pharma anymore.
I know. So good.
What a feeling.
Yeah.
What did you notice about this? Oh, you know how I feel about this. So I'm going to make sure that we just don't go down that rabbit hole too hard, but I'm just going to touch on it while it's still ripe in my body.
Sure.
What side effects did you notice when you were on medication?
So I probably in my journey tried about, 4 or 5 medications. So the first one I was put on, I felt amazing at first. I just felt so calm and regulated. And I was like, wow, is this how normal people feel? But one of the potential side effects of this particular medication, known as Lamictal, is that you can get a life-threatening rash. And after about 3 weeks of being on this medicine, I got this rash. So I had to go off it. And not just did I have a rash, I was starting to, on the daily, have my throat feel like it was closing over and I was struggling to breathe and very scary stuff. So we went off that. And then I tried another one where I felt like I couldn't use my muscles properly. Like I felt like I wasn't walking properly, almost dragging my feet. That was really hard when I was trying to go to the gym, which the gym has been such a pillar in helping me manage my mental health. So I took it upon myself to go and reduce the dose of that, which my psychiatrist at the time was very pissed off about. But, I believe that we all know what's best for us, like not someone that's, assessed you in 90 minutes, but like someone, I was in my own body for 35 years. And then after being on that medication for quite a few months, I went into a really particularly bad. I tried another one as well, but I kept upping the dose and it wasn't covered by Medicare and it was costing $300 a month. So then tried the one that my muscles didn't work. Then I went into this. Well, I was actually put on an antipsychotic, which upon reflection makes no sense because I was only diagnosed with bipolar type 2. I've never had a psychotic episode in my life. Psychosis tends to happen with people with type 1, which is a far more severe version. And I went into one of the worst depressive episodes of my life where I ended up feeling suicidal and wanted to be admitted to hospital, which I've had suicidal thoughts on and off my whole life when I've suffered with depression, but I've never really wanted to, do something. So I was like, oh, I'm not well, I need to go to hospital. So then they put me on lithium, which is a salt essentially. I stayed on lithium for a year. And although lithium helped, it did make me feel like I was wearing a veil through life. So I didn't experience the real lows, but I didn't experience the joy either. And then I also had to have, I think, 3 monthly blood tests to make sure I didn't have liver toxicity on lithium. And yeah, it just sometimes made me feel a bit nauseous. And then I went off it. Although I was feeling quite good, I went off it because there was considerations for me conceiving. And as the universe would have it, the week I was going off the medication, I stumbled across a book called Med-Free Bipolar. And it's written by a woman in America called Aspen Morrow. And she cured her type 1 bipolar with supplementation, lifestyle choices, and really researching a lot of gut health stuff. And so I read the book and I took the list down of all the things that she suggests you should take, took it to my naturopath, collaborated with her. She put me on some SUPs. And then I made sure that I every year or every 6 months do bloods or hair tests to make sure my levels of everything are okay. And I tweak them accordingly. But I have not had a single episode since January 2020. And I'm off meds completely.
It's 4.5 years. Fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Do you reckon people know, I wonder what people think when they're on meds and they're like, oh, this side effect doesn't feel great. Like, do you reckon, even from your experience, it's a lesser of two evils? It's just what you have to put up. Like, what's the thought process? When I was at my worst, there was not a single part of me that's like, I think I'm going to go on antidepressants. Not a single part. And I totally respect is a challenging word. I totally understand that if you don't know better, like how do you possibly do better? But even when I had my darkest of thoughts and I was like, should I hang around on planet Earth a little longer? Not once would I ever fucking consider going on antidepressants. A little bit of passion in this voice. I'm not sure if you can pick up. What were the stories you were telling yourself when you're on these drugs and all this shit was coming up for you?
Yeah, a few things. And I think everyone's different, but I think Western medicine in our society is placed on a pedestal and people think it's the answer to everything, and it's not necessarily. And a few things, and this has been part of my journey as well, but when I was diagnosed, the psychiatrist said to me, Megan, you will have this condition for the rest of your life. You will be on medication for the rest of your life. And that felt like a death sentence. But also, I didn't know what I was doing to navigate this. I felt very alone in it, very isolated. There's also a lot of stigma around mental health or mental illness in particular. And I just was kind of putting all of my trust into this man and what he was telling me. So I really did think that that was the answer. And given that when I first went on medication, I had gone through a really severe depressive episode, I just thought, oh, this is the answer. Like I knew I'd had kind of highs and lows in my life that could be quite extreme. And I just thought, oh my God, have I found something that is going to relieve me of this? And not just that, I will say this, I wasn't aware of how much my childhood trauma was affecting me, and I've done a lot of healing since then. So that's not the case for me anymore. But it was really affecting my day-to-day, my own, just my nervous system regulation, which if you're struggling with that, you'll struggle through life. And that's kind of how I felt. And so I think people want the magic pill as well. They often don't want to do the work, or they think it's too hard, or they think it's not going to work, or they don't want to keep trying things until they find the right formula for them as well.
Have you ever thought at any stage in your life about giving me this guy's details so I could go and slash his tires?
No, I have not.
Haven't you?
No.
All right, I'm just asking the questions. I'm here to interview you and I get to ask the questions. And that's a question I've been thinking about for the last 2 minutes.
Okay.
I'll track his details down and I'll do it myself. So when you come off the medication, are you more optimistic or are you less optimistic in those initial stages? Because I can only assume people that go onto the medication, they're optimistic and there's hope around a better future. And that's what you're sold. That's what Big Pharma do very well at marketing to you. And then you come off it. Is it newfound hope or is it like, I can't do that, I'm hoping there's another option?
There was definitely a newfound hope after listening to this audiobook and hearing someone's story. And I just wish that back when I was diagnosed, that this stuff was shared, like not just this woman who has an incredible story, but I since later, sadly, I wish I knew at the time, but your journey's your journey, discovered Kelly Brogan's work, who was working as a psychiatrist and was prescribing and did think she was doing the right thing. But since all her research with her own clients has discovered that there's another way, and very similar to what the path that I've taken. And she teaches about that. And I think her book, A Mind of Your Own, and she's got another book, I can't remember the title, but like they're both fantastic and speaking to that. And it's not like in those books, she speaks about like your diet and like making sure your gut health is right, and like, healing and like facing the stuff, facing your shadow, facing all of those things, like, and hearing that there was another way. And because I was already coming off the meds anyway, because you can't be on lithium if you're going to try for a baby because it can cause heart defects in babies. It was like, well, this is the option. And I just thought maybe there's another way. And then when I learned about it, I was like, this is amazing. This woman had been like med-free and she called herself a fully cured psych patient for 10 years. And she'd gone on to have her own children and like she was thriving.
What's the difference for you between like, let's say a Monday morning? Because not only has your relationship with bipolar changed, your overall life has changed a lot, a significant amount more like in the last 4.5 years. What's your relationship with like a Monday morning, for example? Let's say that you are on antidepressants, you're experiencing bipolar episodes, and then the other elements of your life that, admittedly for your admission was that they weren't quite aligned. What's like a Monday morning now compared to a Monday morning on drugs, experiencing bipolar episodes and living a life out of alignment?
So different. I think, yeah, well, I mean, you even just asking that question makes me reflect on the fact that the bipolar, like, and I do think that medication in a lot of cases is just a Band-Aid. And now that you say that out loud, I'm like, that was a Band-Aid for my life because I wasn't genuinely fulfilled in my life. Like I was doing something I liked for a living and I was like studying interior design back then, but it wasn't really truly fulfilling. I think I was just trying to chase what I thought might be fulfilling, and it's not. And I do feel so much more aligned now and have the most aligned people around me. And I feel like I'm taking my power back and have agency over things. And back then, when I first went on medication and had that diagnosis and felt like it was a death sentence, I really had probably the biggest ego death of my life in thinking that all the self-belief I'd had and then getting this diagnosis, I thought maybe I was just delusional. Maybe I'm not capable of running a business. Maybe I'm not capable of doing these things. Maybe I'm not capable of chasing my dreams. But having watched myself manage this over years without meds and thrive, and have changed all of the things around me in my life as well, it's like you gain the confidence by, I guess, I've proved to myself that I can do all of these things. If I answered your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you first thing in the morning do like a happy dance or star jumps or anything on your bed now that you live a life more fulfilling?
Do star jumps. I quite like the idea though. But I never ever feel like I don't, oh, like kind of in winter a bit, but that's different. Like I never feel like I don't want to get out of bed. Like I used to live in Melbourne and like you couldn't pay me enough money in the world to move back there now.
Oh
And
my
I don't
God.
know how I lived there for so long, especially the weather. Like that just kills your soul, if you
Mm,
ask me. But also just the rat race and the craziness and the, wanting to sort of fit into a box. Like you talk about it when you go and visit cities and you're like,
mm,
you just see all these people walking around, cookie cutter, living their
yeah.
corporate lives.
Yeah. It's like it's the whole you can't see the forest from the trees when you're in it.
Totally. And
And
you
I
just
remember,
think it's
yeah.
cool or that you're just doing it. But when you step back and go and do something that feels really good, I always said when I first moved to Queensland, this feels expansive. Like I could
Mm,
just feel, even just physically, like, when you're cold and you want to like huddle and like close down like this. And it's like the sun on my face was like, oh, yes, like just I wanted to kind of, like the
mm,
opposite.
yeah. It's a really good analogy. I haven't heard anyone use that. It's
Yeah.
great. Do you reckon? So just going on that Melbourne piece, do you think like what do you remember about either your thoughts or even your kind of body as a signal for where you're at? And the reason I ask that is you can't change what you can't see. So now that we've created a life and a lifestyle away from this rat race, from this very robotic, rigid cluster, like, what do you remember being your experience at the time? Because if I think I had a mate who moved up to Caloundra, he's one of my best mates, and he said it to me. He's like, bro, when you finally leave Sydney, you are going to understand and you break away, you are going to see things differently. I was like, oh, mate, whatever the fuck you're talking about. You've lost your marbles. And then I was like, oh, okay. I see it. But I couldn't even I couldn't even register the words that were coming out of his mouth when I was living in Sydney. He was living in Caloundra and he was telling me this. I just couldn't I was like, mate, you've lost the plot. But like, what was your experience with that?
Well, I agree. When you can't change things you can't see, and when you're in it, you're in it, and you're just kind of
Mm,
cruising around doing the same thing week in, week out, and just, I guess, for lack of a better term, tolerating it.
such a good word.
And I feel like it culturally, Melbourne just loves itself sick. And like, I don't mean that like just Melbourne is great. Like there's a lot going for it, but I think people that live there, it's like there's always this talk of like how much they love Melbourne and how much they love this and how much they love that. And you kind of gaslight yourself as well and go, I should be grateful.
The
Like
should. Ah,
I should be
preach.
grateful. Like this is great. And I, have this great life and blah, blah, blah. But like, really, until you drill down on what your own values are and what it is that you want and not what everybody around you wants, can you get really clear on that and then go after that?
That is one of the most beautiful and like important messages so far. There is a person that Melbourne is suited for. There is a person that Sydney is suited for, and there's like our type of people who we all have our differences. But I reckon if let's say when we were at Tommy's a couple of weeks ago for dinner, I reckon if you kind of proposed that in a dialogue of like I should be grateful, the majority of them would have experienced that at some stage. Like I experienced that deep in my soul regularly when I was in Sydney. I should be grateful. There's people that are doing it worse. I should be grateful. I'm healthy. I should be grateful. I'm in a relationship. I should be grateful. I have friends around me. I should be grateful. I'm in a great part of Sydney, the eastern suburbs. Like a whole bunch of shoulds. And now for the last 4 years, there hasn't been a gaslighting of gratitude of like, I should be grateful. I don't even think about practicing being grateful, albeit Shani and I do it every night because I just am, because it is
Mhm.
just me. I don't have to force this manufactured gratefulness. Do you feel the
Because that
same or am I?
in accordance with your own values and not other people's. Like that is the ticket. Like Dean Martini says that's like the key to happiness is living a life according to your own personal values.
You're speaking of the converted. We came here, I don't know if you remember, we actually came here to talk about IFS. So I guess we should probably
We
talk
should.
about
Let's dive in.
what does IFS stand for? What does it even mean? And
Okay.
how many families could we possibly fit in our body? Because I have a lot of families, it appears.
One, but it could be a very big extended family.
Well, I come from a small family, so it feels like now that I've got 16,000 families within me, I've made up for it.
Yeah.
Can you
The big
please
one.
explain what this family system thing even means?
Sure. So internal family systems is a type of psychotherapy. It was invented by a man called Dr. Richard Schwartz in the 1980s. And he kind of stumbled across it just by being curious with his own patients and found that like we have within us what he calls these like sub-personalities or parts. And that might sound really weird or schizophrenic or multiple personality, but I guarantee you, you all have parts within you. A really relatable example of that is like, say, for example, the alarm goes off in the morning. You've got one part of you that wants to get another hour's sleep, but there's another part of you that wants to get up and be productive. Like that's a good example. And the way it works is that you have what we call self energy. So that's who you really are underneath all your conditioning, any trauma you've experienced, anything that's happened in your life. And that is a naturally calm, compassionate, confident version of yourself. A lot of people might kind of describe it as like what you feel like when you're in flow state or like love, or like you might describe it as soul or something like that. And then you have protector parts. Protector parts are the parts of you that will kind of act in ways that like you might experience self-sabotage, you might experience extreme emotion, you might have a habit that you can't kick. But that is a protector part that developed sometime way back when to basically you had an experience where you felt a certain way, where you might have felt really upset or scared or whatever when you were younger. And that part is there to try and stop you from ever feeling that or experiencing that again. So it will act in ways, whatever it sees as a potential risk, it will act in those ways to protect you. And it's protecting like an inner child underneath. So we actually work with a protector part, get to know it, and then we're able to like go through the process of like getting to know that part of you and then healing the inner child underneath. So then that new protector role can have it, that new protector can have a new role. So they're not acting dysfunctionally or they're not running the show anymore. And you can become more led from self energy, which is that cool, confident, calm version of you.
So what you're saying is I'll be cool if I can tap into my self energy.
100%.
All right. I like the idea of it. So is there a connection between the protector part and the ego?
Well, that's pretty much what the ego is. It's a protector part. Yeah.
We've done a lot of work together. Do you want to give a couple of examples? I'll just kind of lay it all out on the line here of where my protector part and my ego, some people will have a little chuckle with me and my ego, but where that has shown up and what we kind of move through in the 12 weeks that we worked together.
Sure. So you started with me and we wanted to work on what we named him Coach Blake. So Coach Blake is the guy that gets on social media and wants to give everyone a rev up speech about like what they could be doing better in their life. And you had concerns about that part showing up and having an energy that wasn't quite conveying the message that you wanted to convey. So you felt like maybe that part might sound to some people like a bit shaming or a bit like judgmental. And you weren't even quite sure what it is. And that's why this work's so brilliant, is because when we do go through this process, we get to know parts of ourselves that are kind of hidden deep in our subconscious. And that's why it's kind of so effective, is because we can go there. But we wanted to work on that part of you. And we did throughout the 12 weeks. Like we saw real shifts in how you were showing up on social media. You just like, and also a big part, I think, for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, was you really struggled to have any real self-compassion. And I think that's a key in us healing our stuff and actually like working through these things. But something kind of clicked.
Just on that, I'll be really interested with you, this being your work, because I've spoken to a couple of, well, not in an IFS sense, but I've spoken about compassion. I call it compassion accountability, which is interesting. There might even be a piece going on there. But what I've noticed for a lot of people when it comes to compassion is a underlying belief that it's letting themselves off the hook. If I'm compassionate towards that part, then I'm essentially just making up excuses. And I feel a lot more comfortable talking about compassionate accountability than I do just compassion, because I think there's still a part of me that thinks you can buy into like bullshit stories, which I've seen happen numerous times. So is that a common theme that you've seen with your own clients of like their relationship to what compassion looks like?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like a lot of people have this fear of compassion, or like this fear that they're going to be in victim. But by doing that, by thinking that way, I think that keeps us stuck, because we don't do that. Like the compassion is necessary for the healing, and that's not being in victim. But I think that's why this works so well, is because we work with parts of ourselves And it's not about having compassion for us particularly in this work, but when we work with, say, the protector, we find out about what it's doing, why it's doing it, when it started doing its role, why it started doing its role. And then it becomes like we've developed a relationship with that part of us. So we're like, oh, I understand why you're doing that because, this happened in, you could have been bullied in grade 2 and there's something that's protecting you from that, like ever happening again. Like that's and once you find that out, you actually can have some appreciation for that part that's doing that role. Then when we find out who the inner child is underneath, you can have compassion for your younger self, say your 6-year-old self. And that's the difference. It's not like going, oh, I have compassion for myself now, because I think people are very uncomfortable with that at times. But if you had a 6-year-old in front of you going through that thing you went through when you were 6, you're not going to tell them to suck it up or stop being a victim. You're going to get down to their level and give them what they need. And that's the difference. It's like you can separate from that, you're not a victim right now, but your poor little 6-year-old self went through this thing that might have been quite traumatic. And then you get to give them what they needed back then that they never got. And that's why it's quite powerful in that regard. Did I answer your question?
It did, very nicely.
Yeah.
Do you remember, I can't really remember, the root cause of Coach Blake? Obviously that's a protective part of me and that's quite a strong ego element to me. But can you remember what it was protecting? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I have it in my notes.
Yeah. Let me just talk to it quickly because I think it's a good, to have this as a real life example for people to kind of start to get their head around it, the understanding of it. So if I think about, if we use IFS as the model and the protector part of me being Coach Blake, where it really stood out is you guys and Megan and a lot of our close friends, because they're like, who the fuck is this version online? Because it's a very different person in person. And often I was the complete opposite really to what a lot of people do, where they put their best foot forward on social media and behind, maybe not their best foot. I literally put my worst foot forward on social media for 2 decades. And they're like, and you, Bree, Shani, Genoa, Evan are like, they're worlds apart. There's a kind of version in person that isn't really experienced online. And I think one of the challenges for a lot of people is you can't see, you often can't see your stuff and you need people to be able to bring that to your attention. And I could kind of feel that I would almost like a rev up is probably, I think Anthony used that term once, like a halftime rev up, but I just don't do that in person.
No, you don't.
And it bothered me because it broke. Whenever friendships in my world have been broken, they've been broken through my social media in terms of how I show up on that. None of them are broken really in person. So I saw this extremely dysfunctional version of me, and we're having compassion for that version because it was protecting me, but an extremely dysfunctional version, which I very kindly displayed to the whole world. It's not like it's just in the home where 1 or 2 people saw it. It was literally everywhere. So the ultimate dysfunction where everyone gets to see it. But I think the point I'm trying to make is without you guys bringing it to my attention, I probably kind of knew that there were 2 slightly different versions of me. And it's not an intentional thing. I don't go, how can I fucking be a dick on social media today? But it was protecting me. What other parts are common that people might be like, oh yeah, I can see how that, you gave a really good example of mornings, but how else might people start to identify parts?
Yeah. So in IFS, they say, you're in self when you're in one of what they call the 8 C's. So I did use soul and love and flow state as an example, but they are calm, compassion, creativity, curiosity, connectedness, clarity, and I can never remember the 8 off the top of my head, but you can look them up online.
There's 8 C's. Type in 8 C's IFS, you'll find it.
IFS. But if you're not in one of those 8 C's or partially, then you're generally in a part. You're blended with a part. So
are you ever in all 8?
No, just one. It can be more than one, but
cool.
If you can sort of identify you've got some curiosity or some compassion or calm, but if you're feeling angry, sad, any kind of emotion that doesn't feel like any of those 8 C's, you're generally in a part. But I guess some really relatable examples, and often you'll have your biggest struggles will be when you've got what we call a polarization, but it's just an inner conflict. So you've got 2 parts in conflict, like the example I used of getting up in the morning. But a really common one I see with my clients, I work primarily with women, so most of them have a people pleaser part. And when you have a people pleaser part, you generally will also have a part that's feeling resentful or angry because you're not speaking your truth, you're not saying what you need, you're just saying yes to everything and overloading yourself and feeling quite overwhelmed. But yeah, people that like say, I know a lot of people will use that term like I have anxiety or I am an anxious person. That's just an anxious part of you. People can often have an anxious part of them that's like in polarization with like an exhausted part because that's quite exhausting, like feeling anxious a lot of the time. Other common parts, like people can have angry parts, people can have what we call caretaker parts. So it's nice to look after other people, but when it becomes unhealthy is when you start to do like a caretaking where you're doing something for someone else that they could already do for themselves, or you're doing something for someone else at the expense of your own needs.
I don't know if our mate Schwartz, he's got some research around this, but the ability for you to unlock energy, the more parts that you move through must be unbelievable. If you think about, and this is a fascinating topic. I'd really love to find the expert on this because the ego, albeit very subtle, and we all have one, and it evolves and dissolves and things like that. But essentially, like it's a lot of unconscious energy to have parts or have masks that you put on unconsciously each and every day.
Totally. But self energy, we're like, we have loads of energy.
Yeah, you would.
And it just feels, everything feels effortless almost. Yeah.
How do you, if you think about I don't know, we're kind of zooming back a little bit, but if you think about the amount of parts that you've integrated, dissolved, I'm not sure of the right terminology, what do you notice about your own like filters in which you see the world? What have been the biggest shifts for you with the more of this work that you've done?
The biggest shift would be for me would be connection with other people. Like when I first started IFS and I used to get on these Zoom calls to do the work, like the IFS, like the women that I'd been training with, we would get on and do like practice. And I would just notice that I had a part that would think about every single thing that I said. And I would like, when they would do their shares, I would ferociously be writing notes going, oh, I need to write everything down to remember it so then I can give them appropriate feedback and make them feel really comfortable and seen and validated. Like I just wasn't even there. But like now I can just sit and listen and then just like take that in and reflect and then give a genuine response back. But I was so dysregulated that I was just freaking out all the time. Like I was just so, yeah, it was insane when I look back, but that's just how I existed.
If I think about our social interactions in person and the first one compared to where you are now, I don't know if anyone has given you this feedback. I'm so glad that you're getting it on a podcast in front of everyone. The thing that I noticed is it felt like there was a dissociation and a glaze over your eyes at times when you were in social settings. And now visually and when I'm looking at you, you can still, it's like a very similar look, but there's a contemplation and a presence that almost looks the same if you don't know what you're looking for. But that is how I would describe the difference in I think about a 2.5 year period. Does that feel about right?
100%. And when you probably met me, I was dissociated most of the time, I would say. And not to say it still doesn't happen because it does, but yeah, even I remember you giving me that feedback quite a couple of years ago, and you said, I noticed at the dinner table when you're not engaging in conversation, you kind of glaze over. And I reflected on that and it was quite big for me. I was like, oh, I do that. But then I remember sitting at Tommy's a few weeks ago and I was like, I just had a moment where I was like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just sitting here like comfortably relaxed, like I'm not worried about anything or stressing out or having this kind of anxious part or overthinking part taking over. Like it could just
Those are the
there.
exact two examples I just had in my mind.
Yeah.
Because again, if you don't know what you're looking for, it looks the same. She was sitting back, kind of in the conversation, but kind of not. But there, as you said, there was a glaze and a dissociation whenever we first had this conversation 2.5 years ago. And then I remember looking at you and Tommy's and going, looks very similar, but I can tell that she's just happily sitting in contemplation, just immersing herself in the conversation, but sitting back on the outside of it almost is how I would describe it.
Yeah. It's like when you do this work, it's like all the excess noise that's been there probably your whole life or for most of your life is gone. And then you can actually just go on with living your life and being present and being connected. And your life just gets richer, I think.
Yeah. Guys, as someone who has done a lot of work across a whole bunch of different modalities, and having spent the last 12 weeks with Megs, have fucking loved it. I knew a bit about it before. I'd read a couple of the books, but it didn't do it justice compared to actually experiencing it. And one of the interesting things I found personally about this work is it feels very subtle, isn't the word I'm looking for, but I think you've used a different word to describe it.
It's gentle.
Gentle. That word gentle.
But powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, gentle. I even feel myself challenged in the nervous system with that. But it is a very gentle approach, but powerful, exactly as you said. And there was just always, in the 12 weeks that we've been together, subtle shifts. And to be honest, I've been trying to work on my social media in terms of how I showed up I've been processing it for 2.5 years. And I'd made some ground, but I haven't been able to clean it up the way that I have off the back of the work that I've done with Megs and IFS. So if that is any indication of what's possible, it's really cool work. Megs, for them to find out more about your magic, where do people go?
You can go to my website, which is just coachmegs.com.au, or Instagram, where I hang out mostly. And my Insta handle is Mental Health Coach Megs. And you're right, like what you just said, is that you can't quite grasp that work unless you experience it.
Let me finish by saying this final thought as well. I had a lot of aha moments in the first couple of weeks. The significant shift in terms of my nervous system really kicked in around kind of weeks 4, 5, 6, and then it's just kind of continued on as well. So just something to be mindful of.
It's week 6, week 6 to 7. Most of my clients, just something clicks and then they just transform something. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. Megs, you're a fucking Jedi, and I love the work that you do. I also have just thoroughly enjoyed your journey. I know there's a core group of us, the last 2.5 years. It is so fucking cool to see everyone's journeys, new people popping up in the coaching space, just providing the world with magic. And you're a big part of that. So thank you for being you and for jumping on the potty.
Thank you so much.